the next part, in fact, the final part of our program for the next 45 minutes or so is going to be a panel discussion with three wonderful panelists that we have. So if I may just ask, just to make sure you're on the line, Sohini Bhattacharya, if you could just say hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Sohini, how are you? Welcome. I'll just do a quick intro a little later, but I'm Akash Sethi from Quest Alliance.
Hey, hi, I'm here, and I'm unfortunately I'm on this side. I'd much rather be on the other side, given this course and the impact it's made on all of us in the last couple of years. So.
I love your Quest to Learn thing in the background there, so that's good. Good marketing. and then our last panelist is Kuldeep Dandewadia. Are you on, Kuldeep?
Yeah, hi Vikram. Kuldeep here.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much for being here. I love your background as well. All three of you have got some very interesting virtual backgrounds or real backgrounds there. So let me do a quick introduction, and then we will have the panelists talk about some of their specific issues that they've been dealing with from a resilience standpoint, and then have an open discussion. Please do put in your questions that you may have on the chat, and we'll try and aggregate them and go forward. So Sohini is an introverted entrepreneur and social change enthusiast who has 25 plus years of experience in the development sector. She's the president and CEO of Breakthrough. Currently, and Breakthrough is a global human rights organization working in the US and India, using multimedia, popular culture, leadership development, and community mobilization strategies, really to prevent gender-based violence and promote the values of dignity, equality, and justice. So welcome, Sohini, and thank you for being with us. Akash who's the founder and ED of Quest Alliance, has over 17 years of experience in education and youth development programs. I'm sorry I'm reading this because I just want to make sure I got my facts right. He has served in leadership roles in organizations like Isaac, Ambuja Cements, Microsoft, and the International Youth Foundation. And he has been engaged in developing networks for knowledge creation and policy advocacy in education, corporate responsibility, and technology for development. Quest Alliance promotes the use of ICT in schools and vocational training to develop self-learning pathways for children and youth. And last but not the least, he's the founder and co-founder and CEO of Reap Benefit, with the conviction that young people's ideas and energy can solve civic and environmental issues. He started Reap Benefit at the young age of 23, fantastic, in 2011. He's enabling children to influence their environment through participating problem-solving methodologies based on their school and student environmental needs. He's a Ashoka Leader Changemaker, an MIT GSW Fellow. I can go on and on. Ashoka Fellow, Unreasonable Fellow, and Forbes 30 Under 30. So welcome Kuldeep, welcome Sohini, and welcome Akash. Maybe I could start with you, Sohini. We've talked, there are two buckets that we talked about during the morning as well as in the breakout. One was really the external resilience and building a resilient organization around donors. And so if I could really ask you to comment on, what is your relationship with your donors? How have they either facilitated or hindered Breakthrough's capacity to respond to the crisis? And how have you kind of communicated with them? Maybe you can just take us through the whole funder resilience program that you've developed.
So thank you, Professor, and thank you CSIP for giving me this opportunity. Just wanted to say that when the COVID-19 happened, we were engaged in a strategic planning exercise for the organization, a 5-year strategic planning, which now looks like could be 10 years also. And so we were, fortunate enough to put this whole financial sustainability question right into that kind of composition. So when we did that, there are 2-3 things that we discovered. One was that we have to optimize our spread across investments, and we have to closely monitor how we are doing, financially. So one of the first things that we did was to reach out to all our funders, both institutional as well as the CSR, corporate funders. And we wrote to them saying that this is the situation. We anticipate anything between a 3 to 6 months and more, delay in our program delivery possibilities. And so we are worried that, we can ask for a no-cost extension like every time. But once we go into that, how are we going to pay the people to deliver the program that we want to deliver? So we reached out to everybody, and we reached out personally to each of them. Um, some of the things that we saw were really, really encouraging. So most of our institutional donors wrote back saying, look, we understand the situation. What do you suggest we do? So one of the things that we told them was that can we, convert some of the program specific, monies into a kind of a general support, and 3 or 4 of them were very, very willing to go with that. And now, I could say that almost all our institutional funders have actually turned our program budget into a general support budget, asking us to pivot the way we want to pivot in case we want to kind of introduce more digital, less, tactical programs and all of that. So that was one of the, kind of biggest assets that we could get. Second thing was that we had just kind of started, retail fundraising a couple of years ago. So we have a small pool of individual funders, and we knew that retail funding is going to be hit, in the coming months. So we actually reached out to this very small pool of individual funders, asking whether they would, continue giving us money, up, some of the donations. We engaged them, we offered them volunteer services, we brought them into other kind of things that they can do with us, and there was a constant kind of a conversation with them. The third thing that we did was, because we're a digital and media heavy organization, we tried digital fundraising. And we've been really, really successful in the last 2 months actually with that. We've raised money on Instagram, we've raised money on Facebook, we've raised money on other kinds of things. We managed to kind of get a Give India partnership going. So those were some of the interesting strategies that we worked out. The renegotiation with the donors we were very successfully where the donors were institutional.
So why Sohini, tell us why you think you were successful, because we hear a lot of stories about CSR money drying up, people saying,
yes,
well, we're going to repurpose everything towards COVID, and so you seem to have been successful.
No, we had very bad experience with CSR money. 2 funders stopped the program in the middle of the program without even a say. There was some discussion at some level. At another level, there wasn't any discussion either. And, so we've had those kind of experiences with the institutional funders because we have built a relationship. And these are all actually funders who've already, invested in us. So these were funders who were 2-year-old relationships. In some cases, there were 2-year-olds, the max out, but 6 months relationships, 2 years relationship. It all was built on the relationship we had with them and the delivery that we had actually done, prior to the COVID-19 on the programs that we were doing. So a lot of relationship building, but a lot of actually impact, showing them that our programs work was something that really worked out on our behalf. We are also actually focused on trying things out which we haven't before, and that I think was a big thing.
Tell us a little bit about that, Sohini, and then I'm going to move on to the next panelist about this Instagram marketing and retail marketing. Tell us about what is new, innovative methods of raising money.
So, so the Instagram thing was, giving people an interesting project to kind of fund, and actually bringing on people to talk about the point of view that we have on gender-based violence and how it's going to actually affect and get further kind of affected because of COVID-19. We spoke about it a lot. We also had focused on things which we saw could happen during the COVID-19 and the lockdown, which was domestic violence and a rise in domestic violence. So we constantly spoke on that. So that was great. We have a great team too. So that was that's an added thing. That great team really helped out to reach out to a lot of people.
We'll get back to you. Maybe I could request, thank you very much. Maybe I could request Kuldeep to come in. Kuldeep, organizations have to pivot. They've had to do things which you've also done. So talk us a little bit as to how you managed the pivot. You've obviously, I think, had some challenges to do that. And how did you execute on that?
So Vikram, just context-wise, as an organization, we are in the space of citizen engagement. So how do you get citizens to solve local issues in the neighborhood? So as such, there wasn't a pivot per se. Actually, it made us more focused, because for once we didn't have a horizontal approach to citizen engagement. It was more focused approach when it came to COVID. I think some of the things which worked very well for us was, number one, was we kind of piggybacked or went back to our community. We have a strong community of about 10,000 young people, and we very quickly reached out to them and started engaging with them on what they think should be the next course of action. And with that, what happened was we very quickly built a anti-fragile system, which was more proactive, and you were getting inputs within the system rather than the information flowing inside out. So I think that went very, very well for us. That actually led to the next very important thing was with our understanding of technology. While we already had built a technology platform, we very quickly realized whether we should bet on platforms we have already built or look at microservices which are already there, like WhatsApp, which allowed us for speed and which allowed us to move faster. And that was a difficult call because you have invested so much time on building tools yourself, and then you kind of look at WhatsApp as a tool which you think is quite flimsy, but you're relying on that to get speed. So I think that was the second interesting thing we did. The third thing we did was we kind of stuck to our strength. Our strength is citizen focus, citizen facing, working with micro individuals in terms of citizens. So the first approach was to work with citizens, which is our strength. The second approach was to work with civil society organizations which have a lot of strength. So to give a specific example, in Bangalore, a great initiative called as Within Bengaluru had started. And we realized that they had much better supply side delivery strength, and we didn't have that strength. So we very quickly went and told them that, we'll provide the backend technology support. We'll work in a non-intrusive way and kind of help things accelerate. So that was the second layer which we focused on very well. And because we did it 1 and 2 very well, we were able to collaborate with the government at a faster pace. So we were very quick in forging partnerships and not being too hung up on we want to do this or you want to do this. As long as we could do it, we were happy to do it. So we were quickly able to do it in Chennai, we were able to do it in Mumbai, we were able to have a conversation in Rajasthan, we were able to have a conversation in Delhi.
So one of the constant themes is that, look, our program delivery gets impeded because of lockdown, and you named all the big cities which had massive lockdowns. So how did you actually, and so all your programs are grassroots, like on the ground kind of advocacy, citizenship programs. So how did you in a way get around this whole lockdown issue?
Yeah. So actually, in just a slight correction, Vikram, while we work in citizen engagement, we are probably the antithesis of advocacy. So we are more doing based and making that as a proof point for advocacy. But having said that, whatever was possible, so obviously the first few months, we realized that hyperlocal information will be way more valuable than anything else because the governments did not have the capacity. And our internal research said that even if we provide hyperlocal information, we will be improving efficiencies for the government by 10 to 15%. So that was our first step. While we were providing information, we were also tying up with organizations in Delhi who were working on rapid response surveys and understanding from them, what is the sense on the ground. As things started moving, we used civil society organizations and their linkages with the government. So to give you an example, in Chennai, there's a wonderful organization called as Bhumi, and they were able to get the data of all daily wage earners in certain parts of Chennai. And we were very quickly able to integrate that information and run an entire crowdfunding campaign to support those people. So we leveraged on the various strengths the civil society organizations had. Either they had access to the stakeholder they're working with, or they had access to the government they were serving. And we provided the backbone for them to some extent, whatever was possible.
And as you did all these things, what were some of the challenges you faced? What 2 or 3 problems that you had to deal with?
Yeah, I think one big mistake we made in the first 2-3 months, and we quickly identified that, was we forgot our roots. We are in service of the citizen. We are citizens serving organization. When you start, so it's a very unique thing. When you're serving citizens, you have a certain volume and you have a certain quality with you. that the governments find that very attractive in crisis situations, because the governments want two things. They want effective people in a crisis situation, and they want a tool to help you. Now, as soon as you go to the government, the requirements keep on changing every day. So from being a citizen-facing organization, we ended up becoming a technology service provider to the government, and we kind of became this football being kicked from one secretary's office to another. So when we did a quick recheck, we told ourselves that we are in service of the citizen. We'll keep on working on that, and let's not end up becoming a tech provider or a service provider, changing feature when it comes to the government. So that was one big thing. The second big learning was that while we were doing things at a very, very fast rate, I wish we would have paused and extracted the nuances and provided that as a policy input to the government. So while we were listening to a lot of policy people, we were like, okay, we have this intuitive information or that intuitive information, but the bane of being a fatigue started hitting in, and we kind of did not stop and say that, how do we extract all the nuances and learnings we have from here and, scale it at a national level. So I think these are the two big mistakes, I think, or two big learnings we had during this time.
Learnings is a very much more constructive word than mistakes. So we'll go with learnings. So it's interesting what you just said, which in the context of caches on the framework, which is like stick to core to your mission, and then the ability to kind of digress from it, and then you try and come back on it or do something supplemental. So thank you very much for that, Kuldeep, all the wonderful work you and Sony are doing. Akash, if I could bring you in with a slightly different angle here, which is Sony talked about communication with funders and the relationship there. Kuldeep talked about program delivery and how to make that effective from a technology, etc. You talked about your internal constituents and what did you do with your employees, your leadership team? I think you all had issues of program delivery and therefore the issues that come with that. Maybe you can talk about how you thought about the internal aspects of the organization during this period.
Sure. So one of the things, late last year in November, December, we were part of many small leadership groups and a larger meeting we had with our entire team. And we were talking about the idea of a sacred pause, or a pause that, allows you to think, reflect. And here we were in March where the whole world had paused, and we had to, make sense of that pause. And so one of the first things I remember that happened as soon as the lockdown was announced was a few days after the lockdown, we just got the entire team together and really just got them to speak and share what they were feeling. And that also opened out, videos into people's homes, which we had never seen and visited. And suddenly I think that conversation was really special because everyone was feeling vulnerable. Everyone was feeling, in a sense, sharing anxieties in a really open space. So I feel that conversation led to a lot of things and insights and more than anything, empathy that was built during that conversation. So holding that conversation to me was really the starting point to be able to take certain steps or do certain things. One of the things was that no one was ready to work from, not everyone was ready to work from home. So we changed the working timings from 9 to 5 to any 8 hours of the day. Whatever time is convenient to you, you can work. We made it an optional 4-day week for people who were struggling to complete household work with office work. So that was something. We had just finalized a counseling service for our employees, especially with mental wellness, and we rolled that out in April, which was helpful. And given the unpredictability of the situation, we were relaxing our performance appraisal for the year so that people had time to reflect, share some of their learnings for the year that had gone by. We were also turning our monthly social gatherings into virtual social gatherings where people were taking initiative to really design interactions to not lose that human connection. And also some of us making a fool of ourselves by starting a small cooking day that we did to get all of our people connected, to show some hacks with cooking. We've done some stuff with just mental wellness and staying healthy. So all of us coming in and hosting these focused conversations, but in a fun, engaging kind of conversation.
Akash, so that perhaps you went through in a very great way as to what you did immediately and get people, the community going. We are now 4 months into this thing, and I'd like to ask all the other two panelists as well, is that we talk a little bit about scenario planning going forward, and still, given that COVID keeps on coming back in different parts of the world, and still cases are surging in India, and we don't know where we're going to end up. How do you see the internal organization being retooled and being more resilient in the context going forward?
Yeah, so I think that's the work really that started with the leadership team. To the second point of the question on what are some of the things, and there was a certain fatigue that set in the first 2-3 months of just this constant replanning, reprojection, renegotiation, and till also we were not accepting that this is going to be in the long term. So once we made peace with that and said, most of the plans that we have made, we have enough projections we have done. So what are some of the things as a leadership team we can think about to think about for the future? So a few things that we've attempted. One is we went back to our funders and said we have these common goals that we are working towards, but we got 3-4 funders really aligned to that common goal, and because a lot of funders had time on their hands, we could actually get them in the same room to talk about the common goals. So that's something that really helped to set that common goal with 3-4 funders, knowing that this is the direction we want to go in a COVID scenario.
You said our business model is changing. Hey, look, we are 4 months in. We don't know where COVID is. We probably have to change our business model. So is that what the communication? And then I'd love to bring Sohini and Kuldeep into this as well.
So business model, I think we worked a lot on digital learning and self-learning models. So in a sense, a lot of the funders were also reaching out and asking us to share a few ideas for the future. So from that perspective, the funders were already on board our business model, and we had to make some changes to really speak to the changing nature with COVID. But we were able to ask them for pro bono consulting on data analytics, on how to better do L&D with our teams. A lot of the dynamics of the teams, of the leadership team itself, gets amplified in this kind of a scenario where there would be challenges that the leadership team is facing with each other. So we got in someone to work on a values session for 4 hours from the lens of Kabir and poetry, and really making sense of values how are they being affected today. So I think some work on values also helped in just bringing some attention to, as individual leaders, we need to work on our own styles and our own patterns in this time, and really focusing on that was also something that I think helped.
So part of a resilient organization going forward, and Sohini, maybe I could ask you this. Thank you, Akash. Is you also had to deal with pay cuts, I'm guessing, and looking at how you calibrate the organization going forward. So how have you thought about the next 12 months for your organization in terms of people morale, mental health, things like that? And what recommendations would you have for the group here as one thinks about those things?
So, we were about to kind of make a 1-year operational plan. And so we now did it with COVID right in the center of that. So few things that we ensured that these were like non-negotiables is that we have to ensure seamless delivery of program with really minimal disruptions, because we do not work on services. Ours is a rights-based organization, and so if you lose touch with the community for 4 months, then it's actually you're taking a backseat for the next 4 years. So one thing was that we will not deviate from our mission, because we knew that violence against women and girls and working with young girls and adolescents is going to become even more important post-COVID. So we had to ensure somehow or the other we have to deliver stuff. So we used radio, we used a lot of WhatsApp. We trained 99 members of PRI members on WhatsApp in groups of 15. We trained youngsters, adolescents who are our target group and people we work with on WhatsApp. We used radio, we created a strong human network of our peer educators, who are these 18 plus people who work with us, and the frontline workers, so that we can keep the human interaction alive, which was one of the most important part that we decided to work on. We also decided to work on a 1-year-long campaign on domestic violence, because that was one of the main issues that came up in this area. And the push is actually to get the government to recognize that the systems are broken, and if they can be repaired and if they can be strengthened. And so we've been working on creating a government response very, very strongly. We wanted to also position issues of adolescence, both boys and girls, with diverse and multiple stakeholders, including our donors. Yeah, so local level advocacy with Panchayat, education and health ministers, at local areas, as well as Niti Aayog and other places, and also setting some national and international agendas, in collaboration with, let's say, the UN Women or the Generation Equality Task Force, evidence building and gathering work on, how we can really do this and what is it that we are seeing that is actually working, which was, we thought, very important. Financial sustainability I've already talked about, but, one of the 3 things that we have decided on is that for any one state will not depend on one institutional or even a corporate funder, because what happened with Haryana is that we are totally focused on CSR funding in that state, and 2 of our big funders actually resigned it. So we are in a mess now. So we have to ensure that there's a healthy kind of combination of both institutional as well as CSR and other fundraising for each region. Second thing was that we will not touch whatever unrestricted reserves we have managed to build up, because this year we will get by, but next year is going to be really difficult. So we are going to hold on and cut costs at any rate and see whether we can hold on to the unrestricted reserves so that we can spend that next year. And cost optimization and recovery at any level. So we worked with our finance team to see what are the things that we are cutting down on. And a huge cut down has been 75% cut down on training costs, because we've turned it all into digital training. We do a lot of training of internal staff. We've turned all that into digital training. So that's a massive cost, that we have saved, which we hope to kind of carry forward next year to be able to do the same thing. And lastly, we're really focusing on gathering evidence and data, because if we do not do that, then this whole year has so much rich learning, and we can so much leverage that will be completely kind of gone. We've also looked at staff resilience a lot. So we have an emerging leadership group in our organization. They have kind of divided themselves into small teams, and they have been constantly sharing resources that staff can use. They've been holding webinars and other town halls on that, and we've been also given a lot of directives to staff on how to kind of look at resilience, look at mental health. There are issues, and there are going to be issues, because people are itching to go now, people are itching to go out and just be there. So we have also created huge SOPs for people who are already going out to the communities.
Thank you, Sonia. So Kuldeep, in terms of, we are now in end of July, and you're looking the next 12 months, and you're building resilience into the organization. And what are kind of scenarios that you're anticipating, and how are you thinking both in terms of external and internal constituents? Go ahead, Kuldeep.
Yeah. So Vikram, I think in terms of resilience, right, our approach was slightly reverse. I think the first question was from a mission point of view. as in is there enough context and is there enough requirement for what we are doing, and what are the tools needed for that. And we kind of started cutting down on the tools which are needed and have one or two and go deeper into this. And like what Sohini said, this was a great opportunity even for us to deep dive into getting a 360-degree view on our own impact measurement. What we are doing, is it really relevant, and how can it help? I think from a 12 to 15 month point of view, the next thing we did was what kind of team will we need in the short term, medium term, and the long term. So we unfortunately already had a few exits planned just before COVID, and those exits happened at a very sensitive time. But having said that, I think the second piece was on how are we going to break the team in the short term, medium term, and long term, and how can you build a community within the organization which will be kind of tag teaming. So rather than creating formal structures, we ended up doing the opposite, started creating informal structures, and the communities were kind of having conversations and moving forward. The last thing, Vikram, which we did from a scenario analysis, and I don't know if this is the best way to look at things, was that we said, okay, 15 months from now, if we have to shut down, then what are the 3 things we want to offer to this space? And that was actually a very unnerving and a liberating thought. And we suddenly were able to focus much more, so we said, okay, we'll build a civic tech tool which will be useful for the future. We are going to extract all our learnings which can be consumed in different parts of the country. With this learning, now we are actually reaching to our financial supporters. So we did not reach out to our financial supporters at the start. We have now started looking at them because we are able to predict what might happen 12 months or 15 months from now. So we were quite slow when it came to the funding piece, but we were quite fast in trying to solve the COVID issue piece. So that's how we have approached it.
So this is an interesting thing that, if you didn't exist 12 months from now, taking that kind of approach, what are the other things which, is there an opportunity now to rethink how the funding model goes in terms of not just regular donors, but more innovative ways of funding, or also setting up like a corpus? I mean, that's something which we don't see enough in the NGOs in India. Is that a viable alternative? Akash, do you want to comment on that?
So I can build on the first point around funding models, and I feel like the opportunity to really bring funders together for a common goal, I feel, is something we can look at more and more, rather than separate project-based silos as a funding model, because I think there's lots of benefits that funders can get from that, and that's something that we need to as a sector, I think more about and try to move funders to. I think in the short term, one of the things we tried was to get the unrestricted funding for the year without necessarily linking that to project funding. Also increasing the ask on the unrestricted side from funders. So we didn't have to depend on our project funding spend to recover some of our unrestricted funds. And that's helped in planning that investment in communication, in branding, to invest that money so that we can see some returns next year. So that's something we've tried in getting some investments to increase our fundraising.
Yeah. So if you want to build resilience, strategic fundraising becomes a pretty critical thing. Have you thought about it, Kuldeep or Sohini? And then we'll have maybe some closing comments from the panelists.
Yeah, we've thought a lot about collaboration, and in fact, we're looking at collaborating with 3 organizations in one state of India to do that. So that kind of divides cost. It also helps us leverage each other's program. Working more within consortiums globally, we are looking at also working in consortiums in Bangladesh and Nepal with other people. So more collaborative consortium funding, if that can happen. And the other thing is that looking at paid work, if we can do that, as I know within the FCRA system, it's very difficult. So maybe have a hybrid maybe have another entity or something like that, because we do get a lot of opportunities for doing some amount of trainings and things which are paid. So looking at really business development for that kind of stuff and increasing that pot.
But tell me, this whole issue of unrestricted funding, I mean, again, the feedback I get from a lot of people is that, people haven't moved away from this unrestricted funding. How realistic is it actually to do that? I mean, anyone on the panel, what's the pitch? Like, how do you actually convince people to do this?
It's and there are CRY and other organizations who are veteran at really doing retail fundraising, and just unrestricted fundraising. Really, it takes a lot. It takes the Mickey out of you to do that, because you have to set up huge systems and processes which we have to do, and then one COVID happens, and then that fundraising kind of dips very fast. So I don't think retail fundraising or unrestricted fundraising is very difficult to do. But there are galas, there are other events you can kind of do. We had a gala planned in September, which we can't do now. So we had to kind of pivot and see whether we can turn the gala into a digital gala. So those are some of the stuff that, you can do. The other thing is that we have often had, as I was saying, the paid amount, for trainings and other kind of doing, curriculums and other kind of things with our organizations. We've been paid for that. So one of the things is to develop that. We have that skill within the organization. Can we develop businesses for that? Of course, with COVID-19, that demand might also be coming down. It's difficult.
I think one last question really for you all would be, there's this thing that we've talked about funding or even people issues in the NGO world from a kind of each NGO kind of doing their own thing, etc. But this also has created a massive awareness about problems in our civil society and what kind of resilience does the society have to have, and what role do NGOs play in that? Any thoughts on that? Any lead? Maybe I could ask each one of you to comment on that, and then we can conclude the panel. Like, what would you think if we just step back from a resilience standpoint? What should the overall non-profit sector be doing, and what kind of advocacy or relationship should we be having with the government for them to realize? Because there's so many things that have come to the fore, which perhaps would not have come if there was no COVID. So maybe some concluding comments on that, and as well as if you have any specific advice for participants in this workshop. Maybe we start with you, Akash.
Sure. I feel the role that civil society has played in this, like you said, in this time is very significant in terms of reaching the unreached, and also just taking civic action, like Kuldeep said, and many other groups. And I think that whole spotlight on the role of civil society and what is it, the critical role that we play, I think we need to really amplify that voice a lot more in various spaces, so that people recognize, or rather policymakers recognize that role that civil society has. I think it's been undermined to be a service provider, a service delivery, versus really being able to really work with those who are most difficult to reach. So I feel that narrative needs to get stronger. And what is leadership in civil society organizations today also needs to get reimagined as to how do we really build leadership for civil society organizations. And I would say those are two questions I have. I don't have really answers to this, but this is something we are reflecting and thinking about in
I mean, I agree, we don't have the questions because these are very tough questions. But I think building the resilience of the whole sector in partnership with funders on one hand, government on the other, is probably that whole ecosystem becomes more critical. Kuldeep? Thank you, Akash.
Yeah. So Vikram, I echo with what Akash has said, but if I take two steps backward, I'm beginning to sense that collaboration is going to be more difficult in the post-COVID world than ever, because now the perception is that there's a smaller pot of fund available, and it at least the sense I'm getting is it's almost like a fight, saying that how can I get that pot available. So I think it's very important for the kind of civil society to introspect and like ask themselves what are we in this for, in terms of strengthening the space. And way more difficult going forward. At least on paper, civil society was talking about collaboration for the last 2 years, but now I feel that we are kind of pushed backwards. And the second thing is, I think the ecosystem, while there is a lot of focus on advocacy and things like this, but what I have realized is a true resilience in the system is built when you have a combination of thinking and doing. And I'm going by the case studies last year. Arvind Eye Care is one such great example, which is a combination of thinking and doing. I think somewhere the civil society is overrepresented in certain places and underrepresented in certain places. So I think there's a great need for actors who do that stitching together, which is not being seen right now. So that's the way I'm seeing it, and probably looking at technology more from a branding or a knowledge distribution mechanism. I think knowledge can be a great way to decentralize the ability to solve. Most civil society people think that technologies will distribute the knowledge, but I think technology can distribute the ability to solve, and I think that's a great point we can look at.
Thank you. Kuldeep, Sohini?
I think there's a great need to actually build up the profile of the sector. And I've been part of many conversations, and we've all agreed that we need an industry body. If this is an industry which has so many innovations, which have done such fabulous work, and in the COVID-19, we've seen it's NGOs who have really come forward to do a bulk of the work that could have been done by many state or central government. So can we get an industry body? Can we improve the profile of the organization? Can we get more, stories out there? Can we build narratives of what the sector is actually capable of doing? So that's on one hand. The second thing is that many smaller grassroots NGOs are going to be in deep trouble. They're already in deep trouble. They're going to be in more deep trouble. Can we find a way of working with them? I mean, we are very interested in working with women-led grassroots organizations. And so, wherever we find that there is an opportunity, because they always have the pulse of the community. So if we can use them, if we can work with them to get where we cannot go as, NGOs who are city-based, can we do something like that? So those are, two ends of the spectrum that we've been thinking about a lot.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Akash, Kuldeep, Sohini. Really, really appreciate your comments and taking the time to share with your experiences, your vision. Some of my key takeaways in terms of what's been working from a resilience standpoint. I mean, there's really no end in sight in a way. I mean, yes, some things are opening up here or there, but there's a high degree of a lack of clarity as to where the world is going to go. And so, how do we build resilient organizations? And a couple of the themes which I took away from this discussion is, one is communications and relationships, whether it be with your partners or delivery partners, your employees or your funders, is absolutely critical. That's one. Second is on the funding side, and this is not a solution that's going to happen overnight, but how do we get more creative in funding? We talked about digital raising, we talked about diversifying our funding base, talking a little bit more about the whole issue of setting up a corpus, if at all, and thinking more strategically in terms of fundraising as opposed to opportunistically. Then there's the issue of program delivery and using technology both to connect in terms of delivery of programs, but also the knowledge sharing and the knowledge dispersation. And lastly, how do we actually make sure that in the context of pay cuts, letting people go, etc., how are we building a resilient organization going forward so that the bond between the people delivering these really, really good programs that you have remains intact? So that's about resilience. Now, the last piece that we talked about in the panel was, okay, where do we go from here? We're building resilience, and that's work in process. But the next phase is, and we talked about it just now, like, is this a real opening call for civil society, for the NGO sector to collaborate? And I think a lot of it is already happening. COVID's kind of accelerated that process. But there's probably a lot more to do, both in terms of reimagining the whole NGO sector, reimagining civil society and the role that all of you have to play in this, reimagining the role of the government on partnership with civil society, and then most importantly in that context, reimagining your own business model as to how do you actually deliver your services and your spectrum of services. So that with that, let me conclude today's session. We really enjoyed having this discussion with all three of you.